Good morning, Intermediate English Conversation students. Well, I hope you're doing this in the morning. I hope that you are not doing this late at night because I know how difficult it is to do work late at night and how your brain doesn't always function. So here we are in one of our coming to towards the end of our classes. I saw some of you guys last week in the Zoom class, so I was really happy to talk to you guys, and I think we did a lot of interesting conversation in some of your classes, at least. Some of you are still a bit shy because we don't get to talk a lot, but I think for the most part we had a pretty good time, don't you think so? Well, in Intermediate English Conversation today, we're going to be going into Unit 5, talking about the stages of life. So here I have man's different stages of life. And we're going to go through and talk about the different stages of life and what happens during those stages of life. Then we're going to do a little bit of grammar because we have to, and we're going to do a little bit of the book, readings from the book, because you guys have the book with you. So I want to make sure that we do at least some of it every single week. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the quiz that is coming up. Okay. So remember, again, if you have any really important questions, please send an email if you do. Okie dokie? Okay. Without further hesitation, let's begin. Okay, here again. Well, I know that in the front we have the picture of the man baby growing into an old man, but I think it's also important that we cover women because half of the human species are women, not men, right? So I want to represent women a little bit. And I couldn't find any of a young Korean baby woman to an older Korean woman. So I had to use somebody from Norway. I'm not from Norway either, but I think the pictures are pretty good. Don't you think so? Yeah, of course. So we got a cute little baby going into a young woman, growing into a middle-aged woman, and the middle-aged woman grows into an elderly woman or an old woman. Okay? So we're going to talk about these different stages of life and what we expect in those different stages of life. Because if you look at our book in Unit 5, it's talking about life events. Life events, right? Good, let's go. So generations. So a generation is a group of about 10 or 15 years a generation when people share some common attitudes and common culture. So generations nowadays move very fast, and in Korea maybe they move even faster than some other places in the world. Your opinions from your parents and your attitudes from your parents can be quite different as well. And also my attitudes and opinions can be quite different from my parents as well, because that's just the way it is. 1,000 years ago, you might not be that different from your parents, but nowadays things have really changed, right? Things have really changed, and we can be very different from our parents. Okay, so the ages and stages. So by stages, of course, we mean, kind of times. So here again, we have our picture of the baby, the newborn baby going into a toddler, going into a young boy, going into a young adult, to a middle-aged man. You see him with his little gray hair there. Now I am approaching middle-aged. I'm still scared to say that I'm middle-aged because I remember not that long ago when I came to Korea, I was in my 20s, and now I'm approaching middle age. Time flies. So please use your time wisely, have fun, and have many different experiences. And then before you know it, we're all going to be very old people. The stages of life. What is this little guy or girl? This is a Newborn. So newborn baby is usually considered 0 to 28 days. Maybe Koreans focus about 100 days, right? Because in the past, if a baby made it to 100 days, that was a very big deal because a long time ago, babies would die very quickly because they're not strong. So we usually would consider 100 days to be a very important time. However, in America, 100 days is not too important because I mean, well, America has had a high standard of living for, a long time, for more than 100 years. So 100 days was not that important of a thing. But if you go back in American or English culture, I think you'll find that 100 days might have been very important. But nowadays, we talk about stages of development, like the development of the baby's brain and baby's behavior. It changes a lot after those first 28 days. So that's why we count that as a newborn baby. And then this is called an infant from about 1 year old, 1 month old to about 1 year old. And it's a bit different. It can sort of function different than a newborn baby, right? A newborn baby is totally helpless. An infant is almost totally helpless, but it can sort of move around and interact a lot, right? So an infant is another word for a baby. An infant, right? It's a little bit more independent. And in English, sometimes we'll say, you might hear the adjective infantile. Infantile means you're acting like a baby. It's a kind of insult to say somebody's infantile, which is kind of bad for babies because a baby doesn't really have a choice about how it acts, right? Okay, and what is this called? Do you know? You recognize that? It's called a toddler. About 1 to 3 years old is a toddler. Why do we call it a toddler? Actually, I'm not exactly sure. I think it's about something the way that a toddler walks. And many people know that toddler is a very difficult age. Do you remember being a toddler? Do you remember always being upset when you were a toddler? Because I always see toddlers crying. Toddlers are always crying and screaming and so on, right? So some people call it the terrible twos, the terrible twos, because toddlers can be not well behaved at that age, because they still think that they're a baby, right? But they act like, right, but they have the sort of energy of an older child. So that is called a toddler. And what is this? A little bit older than a toddler. She's a very cute kid, right? What do we call this? The stage that's above a toddler, but not really a full kid. We say young child, and the young child is 3 to 12 years old. Oh, those are the ages I remember the most. How about you? Do you remember being 3? Maybe not too much, maybe just a couple of images of being 3, but I bet at your age you remember 12 a lot. I remember 12. I think when I'm about 10 to 12, I really start to remember things more. You probably have some of your best memories from when you were like 10, 11, and 12 years old, right? Especially if you had a very good childhood. Those memories are very important, and that's when you really start to remember important events in your life, when you were a young child or a kid, right? A kid. And then the next stage, I think you know what it is, right? This is called a teen, right? Or an adolescent. Adolescent, sometimes we call it. Now, a teen, I think you definitely remember that because many or most of you are still basically teenagers. Remember that in my students will refer to 12 to 18 years old American age, but that's not American age. That is world age. This is, of course, like 13 to 19 or 13 to 20 in Korean age. But remember, Korean age is actually what we call Confucian age, Yugyo age, right? So, in fact, most of the world doesn't follow that, but Places like China used to and Taiwan used to, but they now follow what we call international age or Western age. Even North Korea doesn't follow the Korean age. So let's think about it only for this class, by international age, 12 to 18 years old. Most of you are still in this age range, right? If you're in, I'm sorry, many of you are not. You guys are international age. Most of you guys are over this age. I'm sorry, you're more than 19 or 20 years old. But many of my global English students are still 18, 19, 20 years old. We call a teen or an adolescent, right? Adolescent. And in fact, this is kind of a new age. This before a long time ago, more than 100 years ago, this was just a young adult, right? Because people in the Joseon times or people in the old days of America, they got married when they were 16 years old. So they didn't really have teenage. Teenage is like a sort of something that was made once we became rich, right? And once we could give kids a more comfortable life and time for their mind to develop, right? So that's a teenager, or adolescent. Maybe some people say it's the best years of your life. How about this? Well, she kind of looks like Ajuma, right? But she's just an adult. So I'm still in this age. Luckily, but I'm gonna be out of here not too long, so I'm a little bit sad about that. But I think when you're 18, 19, 20, you're still kind of a young adult. You're still a teenager in your mind. And it depends on the culture in the country, but the adult is when you really, once you're 26 or 27, you really start to think about yourself as an adult. Maybe your parents don't always treat you like an adult, but you really can start to think about yourself like that, right? So most of you guys are not, many of you guys are in this age now, right? Do you feel like an adult? Do you feel like you've reached that stage yet? Maybe you don't want to be. Especially because adult nowadays, especially in Korea, has like a lot of pressures associated with being an adult. Do you feel a pressure associated with being an adult? How about this? What is this? This is a kind of stage of life, an important event in the life. What might this important event in your life be? Well, this is your 20s, right? 20 to 29 years old. It's part of being an adult, but I think that it's, especially now where everybody's a student in Korea, almost everybody goes to university. I think your 20s is like a really important part of your life. It's not quite an adult yet. Like I said, most of you don't feel like you're adults yet. You feel something different. You're in your 20s, you don't feel adult, and you don't feel a kid anymore. Especially guys have to finish the military, and some of you are going to go to graduate school, 대학원, or travel abroad, or work abroad. So your 20s is an important time, maybe between being a real adult. How about this 아저씨? What can we say for him? He's maybe middle-aged. 40 to 60 years old is a middle-aged person. And I'm so scared. Like I said, I'm going to be a middle-aged in a few years, and I don't know what to do about it. I'm so sad, but that's life. We all get old, right? And I try to remember we are only old in our mind. It's just a number. It's just a number. So how about this? You know who this is? I'm sure you maybe saw him because he used to be in every Marvel movie. That is Stan Lee. Stan Lee. He died maybe 1 or 2 years ago now, but he's a creator of many characters like Spider-Man and Iron Man. Stan Lee is an elder or elderly, so 60 years old and on. I think maybe legally in the United States, you're not elderly until you're 64. You're not elderly until you're 64. So, yeah. So I think I graduated, when I graduated, that's 20 years till I become middle-aged, and then another 20 years until you become elderly. But I think legally in Korea, you're not elderly until you're 65 as well. And in America, I think 64, but I'm not sure exactly about that. Stanley, I think he was like 94 or something, so he really was very active and seemed very young. And we can see here this lady lighting her cigarette. She shouldn't be smoking at that age, right? But she is. She said she made it long enough. She's 100 years old. She's a centenarian. Centenarian. So centa, like century, means 100. 100 to 199. We don't have anybody who lives to 199 nowadays, but a person who reaches 100, we call them a centenarian. And nowadays, Korean women have a lot of centenarians, a lot of old people, and in some of the Japanese islands as well, very long-lived people. I don't know why. Korean men, not as much, but Korean women have lived a long, long life. Many centenarians. We don't know it's the diet or stress, lack of stress or why, but and then, of course, rest in peace. Everybody comes to death, right? Well, we don't have to think about that very much. And then other things that we have here. Life events, important life events. So, childhood, graduation, falling in love, getting a job, getting pregnant, having children, taking care of children, sending your children off to school, and then being old together, an elderly couple, are all different life events that most of us will go through. Maybe not all of us. Some people nowadays don't want to get married and don't want to have kids. And sometimes that's for social reasons or for economic reasons. How about you? Do you want to get married and have kids? Many of my female students no longer want to. How about this? What is this life event? What does this represent? To be brought up by. Your parents raise you or they bring you up. They grow you, you might say, to be brought up by. My parents brought me up to be honest. My parents brought me up to be intelligent. My parents brought me up not to be selfish. So to raise you, grow you, and teach you everything is to bring you up, to be brought up by. What did your parents bring you up to be? Yeah? Okay. To be looked after when you're a child until you become an adult. And maybe some of you are still young enough, your parents are playing some part in bringing you up still, right? He was brought up by his grandmother. Some people were raised or brought up by their grandparents or their uncle or aunt. And some people didn't have parents, but they had to be brought up by somebody, right? The next one is immigrating. Immigrating. So to leave your country in order to live in another country is to emigrate. Immigration. Korea has a kind of high rate of immigration. People from Korea often go live in another country, mostly in the United States, but also in Japan and in Canada and in Australia and New Zealand. So to leave your country in order to live in another country is to emigrate. We're thinking of emigrating to New Zealand. And many of you at least will temporarily emigrate to the United States or Australia or Canada. Some of you already have. emigrated and come back. And some of you will never come back. You might live in another country, like I've lived in Korea for a long time. But this is an important life event for many people. How about this? What do you think this one is? I'm sure that you know many of you already have had your chosarang, right? To fall in love. To start to love somebody. Why do we fall in love with one person rather than another? You all knew somebody who liked you, but you didn't like them back, right? Why do we love some people and not others? And why do they love us, but we don't love them, right? It happens. How about this one? Well, this, of course, was a Western tradition, and I think it's been given to Korea. I think in Joseon they didn't give rings, right? But I'm not sure. It's to get engaged, right? Get engaged is the plan to be married. And I don't know, this is not that important in Korea. I think in Korea, maybe you just get married, right? I'm not sure. But it's kind of important in America and some other Western countries to get engaged, to like start your marriage. If two people are engaged, they have formally agreed that they will get married. We got engaged about this time last year. I'm sorry if you can't see that very well on there, but I can read it to you. We got engaged about this time last year. Getting more stages here. To grow up. To grow up. Okay, change from being a baby or young child into being an older adult or child. Do you guys feel like you've grown up yet, or are you still growing up? She's really starting to grow up now. And this one, of course, is to pass away. This is like a nicer way to say die. To die, this word is used to avoid saying die. When you think